MJ and Morgan made a deal. We're gonna turn this thing around. As of now, it's pretty much my way or the highway. And my way is gonna be pretty rough right at first. So everybody here basically is fired.
Richard Rawlings finally names the 5 worst employees at Gas Monkey Garage. Join us as we reveal shocking stories, drama, and betrayals that reveal why these names made his blacklist. Aaron Kaufman and the Duo. Gas Monkey Garage was built on roaring engines, bold dreams, and Richard Rawlings' non-stop drive to keep the spotlight shining. But as Richard later admitted, the cars were often easier to handle than the people working beside him. Fans of Fast and Loud saw the laughter, the late nights, munches, and the finished builds rolling proudly across the screen. What they did not see were the battles that nearly tore the team apart from the inside. 5 names stand out in particular. Together, their stories showed just how much pressure was hidden behind the cameras. Richard and Aaron Kaufman looked like the perfect pair when Gas Monkey Garage first took off. Richard brought the deals, the charm, and the big ideas. Aaron, with his steady hands and creative vision, turned old steel into rolling art. Fans adored Aaron with his beard, calm nature, and knack for doing the impossible under a deadline. It seemed like nothing could stop them. But Richard later revealed that their partnership was far from smooth. He once compared it to driving with 1 foot on the gas and 1 on the brake. Richard lived for speed. He wanted projects finished on time to keep the cameras rolling, the fans entertained, and the sponsors happy. Aaron, on the other hand, believed good work could not be rushed. He wanted perfection, even if it took twice the time. The clash showed up in nearly every big build. While Richard pushed for deadlines, Aaron pushed back for quality. "You can't rush art," Aaron once said during a heated moment, and fans thought it was just drama for TV. Before Gas Monkey Garage became a television empire, Richard Rawlings was just a car-flipping hustler with big ideas. He didn't have a global brand, a reality show, or a loyal fan base. He had ambition and a need for someone who could bring his car visions to life. That's when he crossed paths with Aaron Kaufman, a young bearded mechanic with unmatched technical skill and a sharp eye for detail. Their meeting wasn't staged or scripted. Richard had taken his car into a Dallas shop where Aaron happened to be working. He was immediately impressed, not just by Aaron's work, but by his mind. Aaron didn't just fix things. He understood cars on a deeper level. Richard knew right away, this was the guy. That chance encounter would set the stage for one of the most famous automotive duos on television. Richard hired Aaron, and together they formed the core of Gas Monkey Garage. While Richard pitched wild ideas and big builds, Aaron quietly turned those visions into reality. Their chemistry made Fast and Loud a success. Viewers loved the dynamic, the flashy businessman and the no-nonsense builder. But success changes everything. In the early days, their partnership worked because they needed each other. Richard needed Aaron's craftsmanship. Aaron needed a platform. Together, they built cars, built a brand, and built a brotherhood at least for a while. Aaron had a say in which cars to take on. He had freedom in how he approached the work. Richard trusted him, and the garage felt like a team effort. But as the cameras rolled in and Gas Monkey became a full-blown TV product, that balance shifted. Deadlines tightened. Schedules got crazier. The builds became more about what looked good on screen than what made sense in the shop. Richard thrived under the spotlight, chasing business growth and fame. Aaron started to feel boxed in. He was expected to turn out flawless work under impossible time pressure, all while being filmed non-stop. The more the show grew, the less Aaron enjoyed it. He once shared that over time, his role changed. He had gone from being a creative partner to feeling like just another employee. The decisions came from the top down. Aaron no longer had control. He wasn't building cars the way he wanted, he was performing for an audience. That tore at him. He valued the process, the build, the pride in the final product. But that pride was being pushed aside in favor of ratings and merchandise. Despite their early bond, Richard and Aaron's visions drifted too far apart. Aaron didn't want the fame or the money if it meant sacrificing his values. So he walked, quietly, without drama, just a builder who'd had enough. What made it harder was the loyalty Richard felt. Aaron was like a brother, Richard shared. I thought we could push through the battles because together we were unbeatable. For years, that belief kept them side by side, even as the tension grew sharper. But as Gas Monkey became more successful, their differences only deepened. Finally, in 2017, Aaron walked away. Fans were shocked, but Richard confessed it had been coming for a long time. It was like losing my right hand, he said. The split left Richard trying to keep the shop running while fans questioned how Fast and Loud could survive without its most beloved builder. Still, Richard admitted Aaron's mark would always remain. You can change the crew, but you can't erase his fingerprints from the garage, he said. Richard summed it up best with a line that stuck with fans. Working with Aaron was like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. But man, when it fit, it was magic. And just as the dust began to settle from Aaron's exit, another storm rolled in. This time, it wasn't just about one person. It was about a duo whose departure would spark one of the biggest conflicts Gas Monkey had ever faced. Tom Smith and Jordan Butler brought their own flavor to Gas Monkey Garage. Both were skilled and passionate, and both quickly became familiar faces to fans. But Richard soon learned that passion without discipline could create big trouble. The breaking point came in 2014 in what has since been called the fan incident. According to Richard, the trouble started when a devoted fan with cystic fibrosis asked to take a picture near his prized Rolls-Royce. For Tom and Jordan, it seemed harmless. They allowed the fan near the car, believing it was a kind gesture. But when Richard found out, he was furious. That Rolls-Royce was one of his most prized possessions, and he saw the act as crossing a serious line. The argument that followed became legendary among those who worked at Gas Monkey. Richard accused them of disrespecting boundaries, while Tom, never one to hold back, reportedly cursed at him during the confrontation. That was the final straw. Richard fired both men on the spot. Fans watching Fast and Loud had no idea at the time, but behind the scenes, the garage was in turmoil. Tom and Jordan later told their side of the story, claiming Richard cared more about the car than about people. Richard, however, stood firm. You can't run a business on feelings, he said. There are rules, and when you break them, there are consequences. The fallout didn't stop there. Tom and Jordan went on to create their own show, Misfit Garage. To viewers, it looked like a rival spin-off. To Richard, it felt like betrayal. He admitted that seeing his former crew compete on their own turf was a sting he didn't forget. They thought they could build their own empire, he said. But Gas Monkey was more than just a name. It was blood, sweat, and years of sacrifice. Still, Richard couldn't deny that Tom and Jordan had left a mark. Those guys had skills, no doubt, but sometimes skill without respect is a recipe for disaster, he said. Fans later noticed how certain builds suddenly ended, leaving questions about why they were never finished. The answer, Richard revealed, was simple. The people behind them were gone. Looking back, Richard admitted he learned something important from the incident. It showed me that loyalty has to go both ways. You can't give someone your trust if they don't give you respect. That lesson stayed with him long after Tom and Jordan moved on. And of course, Richard couldn't resist adding a touch of humor, even about one of his toughest moments. They say you should never let anyone drive your car, he laughed. I learned you shouldn't even let them stand too close to it. Fans often ask if Richard regrets firing Tom and Jordan so quickly. His answer is always short: no. But he admits the drama that followed proved how unpredictable life at Gas Monkey could be. Richard often reminds people that these stories are not about revenge, but about truth. You can't tell the story of Gas Monkey without telling the hard parts, he explained. And the stories of Aaron, Tom, and Jordan were some of the hardest of all. If you think these three shook things up, just wait until you hear about the next two employees from Gas Monkey Garage, whose presence brought even more unexpected twists to the story. Looking back, the stories of Aaron, Tom, and Jordan showed just how much Gas Monkey Garage was shaped by more than just the cars. These men left behind both unforgettable memories and unforgettable drama. Their presence helped build the empire, but their departures revealed how fragile things could be behind the shiny doors of the garage. And as shocking as these battles were, they were only the beginning. Scott McMillan Jr. and Charles Camino. Gas Monkey Garage had always been more than just cars. It was a clash of ambition, loyalty, and Richard Rawlings' relentless drive to stay ahead. Some employees thrived under the pressure, while others eventually fell out of step. Two such stories, those of Scott McMillan Jr. and Charles Camino, show how even the most skilled builders could end up on the wrong side of Richard's trust. Scott McMillan Jr. first crossed paths with Richard through Aaron Kaufman, his old high school friend. That connection opened the doors of Gas Monkey Garage for him, and soon enough, Scott was part of the crew featured on Fast and Loud. Early on, his presence was a boost. He worked fast, pushed builds forward, and seemed to fit the high-energy pace of the shop. Viewers quickly noticed him, and his chemistry with Aaron made him a recognizable face on screen. For Richard, Scott seemed like a strong addition. He had the skills, and he kept projects moving. But it wasn't long before Scott began wanting more than just being a background player in Richard's empire. According to reports, tensions started building when Scott wanted more creative say and recognition for his work. Around that time, whispers began about Misfit Garage, a show that would later become a rival to Gas Monkey. Scott became a central figure there, and fans connected the dots that his ambitions were bigger than what Richard was willing to share. The split wasn't dramatic on camera, but behind the scenes, it was no small matter. For Richard, seeing a former employee step into a competing spotlight must have felt like betrayal. It wasn't just losing a builder, it was losing part of the brand's identity to a rival show. Fans described it as Scott taking what he had learned inside Gas Monkey and using it to compete from the outside. Richard likely saw that as crossing a line, turning from teammate to competitor. That move may be why Richard eventually counted Scott among the worst employees. Not because of lack of skill, but because of ambition that clashed with the Gas Monkey way. To Richard, loyalty was the engine. Without it, the whole machine was useless. And Scott's exit made the whole garage feel like it had lost a big part. Then there was Charles Camino, better known to fans as Sleeveless. Unlike Scott, Charles wasn't loud or demanding. He met Richard through the early days of Fast and Loud and quickly made a name for himself in the garage with his wiring and fine detail work. Sources say his behind-the-scenes skills often gave Gas Monkey cars the polish that made them stand out. Inside the garage, Charles was dependable. He wasn't a showman, but when the cameras cut away from Richard's deals or Aaron's bold builds, Charles was the one ensuring everything ran smoothly. Fans later commented that you could tell when Charles had worked on a project, the details just looked sharper. But then, around 2017, he simply vanished from the show. One week fans saw him, the next he was gone without explanation. Reports later revealed he had moved to Arizona to work independently. There was no farewell episode, no dramatic exit, no on-screen closure. just absence. For Richard, that kind of silent departure likely hit hard. In a shop that ran on schedules and deadlines, losing a key member without warning can throw everything off. It wasn't about arguments or creative clashes this time. It was about disappearing without notice. And while Charles never caused troubles in the traditional sense, leaving without communication may have been, in Richard's eyes, just as bad. To Richard, reliability was just as important as skill. When Charles left without a word, the trust Richard placed in him may have felt wasted. That could explain why Richard may have silently placed Charles among the worst employees, not for the quality of his work, but for leaving the garage in that way. The stories of Scott and Charles showed two different kinds of breaks, one loud, one silent. Both left marks on Richard's empire, shaping how he saw loyalty, trust, and the true cost of losing good talent. Yet the list doesn't end here. More names from Gas Monkey's past still raise eyebrows, and the next person whose time in the garage was anything but smooth. Casey Mathieu, the painter who walked away. By the time Gas Monkey Garage had grown into a cultural thing, Richard Rawlings had already endured the pain of several departures. Aaron Kaufman had gone his own way after creative clashes. Tom Smith and Jordan Butler had made exits following internal tension. Scott McMillan Jr. had taken his skills to a rival show, and Charles Cimino had quietly slipped away without a word. Each of these losses left Richard in so much pain. But one more name would stand out as the breaking point of loyalty: Casey Mathieu, the painter whose work had defined the look of Gas Monkey builds. Richard first crossed paths with Casey Mathieu in Dallas long before Fast and Loud became a household name. Casey was already known in the local car scene as a painter with a rare gift. His paint jobs were bold, yet clean, with colors so sharp that cars seemed to glow under the lights. When Richard set out to make Gas Monkey Garage a force on television, he knew he needed someone like Casey to give their cars the kind of shine that would make viewers remember every build. From the moment Casey joined the show, his work spoke louder than words. While Richard wheeled and dealed and Aaron handled daring mechanical overhauls, Casey gave the final touch that made Gas Monkey cars unforgettable. Fans would often say that Casey's finishes made the cars look like art pieces rather than just machines. Whether it was a glossy cherry red or a smooth matte black, his paint jobs turned heads on screen and in person. Richard valued Casey's contributions, and for good reason. In a business where deadlines were short and expectations were sky high, Casey delivered again and again. Viewers came to expect that no matter how rough a car looked at the beginning of an episode, by the end, Casey would have transformed it into a masterpiece ready to hit the auction block. But behind the shine, Casey was facing his struggles. The filming schedule was tough, and the constant push for more episodes left him little time for his family or his own projects. According to Looper, Casey had always dreamed of building his personal brand, Casey's Paint Shop, into something lasting. The fame from Fast and Loud gave him the platform, but it also tied him down to Richard's vision, leaving little room for his own goals. Around the year 2015, Casey made a decision that shocked fans. He walked away from Gas Monkey Garage and returned to his own shop full-time. For viewers, it looked like a clean break, but for Richard, it was a major blow. Gas Monkey was at its peak, and losing the painter who had become synonymous with its success felt like losing part of the garage's soul. Richard rarely spoke in detail about Casey's departure, but the silence said a lot. In Richard's world, loyalty was more than showing up. It was about sticking through the hard times and helping keep the engine running no matter what. Casey's decision to leave, especially at a time when the garage was thriving, may have felt like abandonment. From Richard's perspective, Casey had gained worldwide recognition through Gas Monkey, and now he was using that platform to step away. To an outsider, it may have looked like a man chasing his dream, But inside the garage, it meant losing one of the cornerstones of the team without warning. For Richard, who prided himself on running a tight ship, that was hard to forgive. Fans, however, largely supported KC. They admired his choice to put family first and pursue his personal ambitions. Many followed his career after Fast and Loud, celebrating his success at KC's paint shop. The support proved that KC had not only left a mark on Gas Monkey, but also built a loyal following of his own. Yet, for Richard, the wound remained. In his mind, every departure that disrupted Gas Monkey's rhythm added another name to his personal list of worst employees, not because they lacked skill, but because they disrupted the loyalty he expected. KC's exit, much like Aaron's before him, became part of that painful pattern. Looking back, the string of exits painted a clear picture of what Gas Monkey Garage had become. It was not just a workplace. It was a high-pressure stage where loyalty was constantly tested. Aaron Kaufman had left after battles over creative freedom, Tom Smith and Jordan Butler after clashing with Richard's tough leadership, Scott McMillan Jr. after choosing ambition with Misfit Garage, Charles Camino after disappearing quietly, and now Casey Matthew after choosing family and independence. Each story was different, but together they showed the challenge of balancing Richard's vision with the personal needs of his employees. On television, the garage looked like a dream job. Behind the scenes, it was a test of endurance, patience, and above all, loyalty. It is important to note that based on the way he talked about loyalty, it is easy to see why these names may have stood out in his mind. To Richard, Gas Monkey was more than cars, it was his life's work. When someone left, especially at a critical moment, it felt like a crack in the foundation. Aaron's battles, Tom and Jordan's clashes, Scott's rival ambitions, Charles's quiet exit, and Casey's family-driven departure all represented more than just turnover. They symbolized moments when Richard's trust was tested and, in his eyes, broken. And for a man who believed loyalty was the fuel that kept the garage alive, that was enough to place them in a category no employee wanted to be in. As Gas Monkey moved forward, Richard continued to build, sell, and push the brand into new directions. But the stories of those who left never fully faded. Fans still asked about Aaron, speculated about Tom and Jordan, followed Scott's work, wondered about Charles, and admired Casey's success. Their shadows lingered, shaping the legacy of Gas Monkey Garage as much as the cars themselves. And while Richard rarely gave detailed explanations, each departure changed him. They were reminders that even the strongest engines sometimes lose key parts, and replacing them is never as simple as bolting on a new piece. When people think about Aaron Kaufman, Tom Smith, Jordan Butler, and Casey Matthew, they often remember their skill, humor, or sharp presence on Fast and Loud. But in Richard Rawlings' eyes, they also carried the label of being some of his worst employees, not because they lacked talent, but because they could not stay in step with the demanding rhythm of Gas Monkey Garage. The common thread in all these clashes was Richard's obsession with speed and results. Gas Monkey Garage was not a typical workshop. It was a place where every build was a race against the clock, filmed for millions to see. Richard pushed hard because he knew falling behind meant losing viewers, and losing deals. But the very pressure that made the shop famous also became the thing that drove many of his strongest names away. Aaron Kaufman's endless drive for perfection slowed projects when Richard wanted results. Tom and Jordan showed promise but fell short under the strict timelines and constant deadlines. Casey Matthew wanted quality above all else, but Richard demanded speed to keep the cameras happy. At some point, an extra person, Christie, the face behind the desk, eventually could not carry the weight of the non-stop grind that came with keeping Gas Monkey running at full speed. To Richard, These repeated patterns became proof that no matter how much skill or loyalty an employee brought, they were not truly fit for Gas Monkey if they could not match his vision. From his perspective, being unable to keep up, refusing to compromise, or stepping away in the middle of heavy demands were marks of disappointment. That was enough to push even his most trusted people onto the mental list of worst employees. The effect on the garage was huge. Each departure left Richard to pick up the pieces, trying to replace not just talent, but the chemistry fans had grown to love. Viewers noticed the changes and often questioned why the faces they admired had vanished. Yet Richard carried on, using each exit as proof that only the toughest could survive in his world. Looking back, it is easy to see how much these losses cost the show's energy. The very people Richard counted among the worst were also the ones who helped make Gas Monkey Garage iconic in the first place. Their exits left gaps that were hard to fill, but in Richard's mind, the brand was bigger than any single person. That's the harsh truth Richard's list of worst employees reveals. In the fast-paced, high-pressure world of Gas Monkey Garage, survival was everything. If you could not keep up with the speed Richard demanded, you were out no matter how talented you were.